You know what's really expensive? War. We started one war in Afghanistan right after 9/11, and then we started another simultaneous war in Iraq 2 years later. Iraq went on for more than 8.5 years before it ended. In Afghanistan, we are well into our 12th year there now. And even if the only cost you add up from those wars is the financial cost, those wars have been staggeringly expensive. But you want to know what is more expensive than those wars? The George W. Bush tax cuts are more expensive than those wars. Here again is the financial cost of the wars, which started in 2001, and here is the financial cost of the tax cuts, which started that same year. Both are staggeringly expensive. But of the two, the Bush tax cuts are worse. And of course, the combination of the two of them together is stupefying. It is a nightmare. It's the kind of thing that can send the world's most powerful economy from having hundreds of billions of dollars in surplus to instead having hundreds of billions of dollars in deficit. And that's even before the economy blew up entirely thanks to the Wall Street meltdown at the end of the Bush presidency. The Bush tax cuts were so expensive that they just gutted the national budget right in time for the Great Recession downturn that almost took us out entirely. Now we are more than a decade on from that. The Iraq War is over as of just about exactly a year ago. The Bush tax cuts were all extended for one more year last year after they reached their 10-year expiration date. And in the deal that President Obama is due to sign now from his vacation in Hawaii, the Bush tax cuts are about to be made permanent for 99% of all American taxpayers. The tax cuts will go back to Clinton-era rates. Right? The tax rates will go back to what they were in the Clinton era, only on income over 400 Gs. So the Bush tax cuts were a fiscal disaster for our country, but we are keeping 99% of them. Still, though, the president got most of the deal that he wanted in this deal that happened over the holidays, and he did get the Republicans to admit to that one tiny exception to making all the Bush tax rates permanent. And the president signaled in a statement released by the White House today that he is now, after this deal, ready to move on. Specifically, the president name-checked 5 policy areas that he wants to move on, now that this cliff nonsense is at least partially behind us.
Once we get this done, we can get to work on the issues that will determine whether America prospers, not just in the next 4 years, but for the next 40 years. Winding down the war in Afghanistan in a responsible way, reforming our immigration system, and protecting our children from gun violence, freeing ourselves from foreign oil and the harmful effects of climate change, reforming our schools, and opening the doors of higher education to more Americans.
Now, in the White House statement, they did not put in that handy box. We added it to allow for more tight focus on what exactly he name-checked there. President Obama today name-checked 5 things he is ready to move forward on with the new Congress. From this statement today, I think we are supposed to believe that this is the top of the second-term agenda. Ending the war in Afghanistan, immigration reform, gun reform, education reform of some kind, and something on climate change. Now, if this president can get all that done, that would be a heck of a second term, right? Especially if you add in nonpartisan election reform as well, which his attorney general, at least, has been highlighting after the long lines and the partisan bullpucky we saw in running this past election. But if you add in election reform to those other 5, this is a really big and somewhat comprehensive agenda that the president is laying out for his second term, after the little cliff walk we all enjoyed through the holiday season. But of course, all those things he has to do with Congress. And since Republicans control the House, that means the president needs a plan to work with or work around Washington's Republicans. So here's the question. Is there anything about what is going on with Washington Republicans right now that should give us reason to believe that it's possible to work with them, that they are capable of participating in governing the country instead of everything having to be done around them like there's some spilled liquid on a supermarket floor and we're all in danger of tripping? Is there reason to be hopeful? The answer is yes. There is reason to be hopeful. Congressional Republicans, in their current round of infighting and backstabbing and hysterical and hyperbolic self-blame, have decided to make one change in the way they talk about policy, to make one change that I think is a really constructive sign. Before now, Republicans insisted that the Bush tax cuts were free, that in fact all tax cuts were free, that cutting down the amount of money that people give to the government does not in fact reduce the amount of money that people give to the government. That's been their case, right? It is a very weird case to make, but that has been their public contention for years, and they have stuck with it through thick and thin.
Let me just propose something that may seem crazy to you. You don't need to pay for tax cuts. They pay for themselves.
You need policies like an extension and making permanent the 01 and 03 tax cuts. They will be paid for because they create economic growth.
You should never have to offset the cost of a deliberate decision to reduce tax rates on Americans.
You should never have to offset the cost of a tax cut because by virtue of it being a tax cut, it has no cost. It's free. It costs nothing. That's what Republicans have said for years. That is how they justified keeping the Bush tax cuts all this time. That is how they justified going ahead with the second round of Bush tax cuts right after we started our second simultaneous war in 2003. Why would we need to do anything about taxes to pay for that? Tax cuts are free. Down is up. Night is day. The Jets are going to the Super Bowl. It's nonsense. But they have believed and argued that nonsense now for years. For all of the mess in Washington right now, and all of the specifically Republican mess in Washington right now, I am here to tell you that Republicans have apparently given up on that particular part of their nonsensical mess.
President Bush's tax cuts were not paid for. They were anticipated to be grown out of. These are not anticipated to be grown out of. CBO has already said 3.967. In other words, $4 trillion will be added to the debt over 10 years with this tax cut unless we do some spending cuts to help offset it.
Well, hey, that's who congressional Republicans put out to talk about the whole tax cut deal that just passed. And his argument is the Bush tax cuts were not paid for. And boy, were those Bush tax cuts expensive. And we need to come up with something to offset the horrible effect of the Bush tax cuts on the budget. Right, right, a decade on. That has been true all along, but when the Bush tax cuts were the Republicans' own policy and the Democrats were against them, Republicans refused to accept that hard truth. Now that the Bush tax cuts, now that 99% of the Bush tax cuts are national settled policy supported by Democrats and enacted under President Barack Obama, well, now the Republicans think these tax cuts are very expensive. We couldn't possibly be so irresponsible. Congressional Republicans have come to this belated appreciation for how math works simply because the partisan tables are turned. They cannot take yes for an answer. When their policies, their own Republican policies, are accepted, it is by virtue of Democrats accepting those policies that the Republicans no longer find them acceptable. Which is nuts, right? But whatever the reason is that got them there, however nuts their reasoning is to get them here, the fact is, they're here. They now seem to be acknowledging how bad George W. Bush's math was. How George W. Bush's math never really worked. And it never really worked. And maybe that's a start.